I'd like to thank the Dollar Moore Foundation. We are part of the Lake City Creative Alliance. So thank the Continuum, the membership, each one of you a member, and also the sponsorships that we have asked for. And of course, you all for coming out tonight. We're going to be talking about 1943 and 1944. We're going to be talking about the war itself, the men that fought, some of the men that fought into the war, and what was happening at home, at the home base. The election of 1943 and 1944, it was a two-term deal. Mr. Boyd Nettles has won his fourth term. And his last term. We got Mr. Moultrie Epps, Mr. Louis Probst, which is Sam Mack's grandfather. That's the guy with the hat on. Rollins Rhodes, which is Mr. Van Epps' son. Mr. R.L. Coleman, yeah, if you were a Baptist, you would know Mr. R.L. Coleman. And Mr. George Anderson. The fourth.
Who was H.B. Hill?
H.B. Hill was Miss Louise Whitehead's father.
Is he the one that ran the furniture store?
Ran the furniture, grocery store.
Groceries?
Yeah, grocery store. Hill and Dixon grocery store, which was on West Main Street during the time. And he's getting real old now. The four McKenzie brothers. We had James and Donald. Marion was Pete McKenzie. That was Martha McKenzie, Pete McKenzie, father. William McKenzie was Bill McKenzie, Dr. Bill McKenzie that comes to these things. And they were the four brothers, and they were Mr. Hayden McKenzie's boys. And had two boys that were at Clemson and also one in high school. So there were 6 at one time. The Junior Chamber of Commerce. Now, the Junior Chamber of Commerce, we had up to about 1970 in Lake City. And they were men from 18 to 40. And we had people like Abraham Tommy, or Abe Tommy. Jack Singletary was Jack and Sammy, and Patricia Singletary's father. Mr. Harry B.B. Gall, everybody knew Mr. Harry B.B. Gall. Okay? And then Mr. Grover Irick was the president of what we call the JCs.
What kind of books were they collecting?
Can't hear you clear.
What kind of books were they collecting?
All kinds of books.
What paper?
Paper. What happened was they were collecting material for the war effort for the boys, and also to recycle. All the newspapers in the 40s, Lake City News and Post, or the Lake City News, were being recycled. And that's why we don't have a whole volume of newspapers in the 40s and the 50s. Well, actually the 30s and the 40s. Hey, well, he just missed out. He just missed out. We'll get back to him. Okay. Mr. Marion Gravely, which was in charge of the superintendent of the tobacco market in Lake City, became captain and went to Washington, D.C., and left his wife and his son Steve at home. Also, Mr. Ross Rollins and George Tommy enlisted, and Mr. George Tommy was a Citadel graduate, so he became a lieutenant. Mr. Alec Bowen was the first cadet at West Point, and he had to come home because he had an eye infection. And then Sam Mack's dad, Mr. Louis Brooks Jr., was promoted captain, and he was stationed at Fort Davis in North Carolina. Okay. Miss Louise Moore. Well, she graduated from Duke University and received a BA and a RN degree from Duke University, and was in the United States Army as a nurse. Also at the same time, we had Barbara Edie, who she married H.E. Godwin, and her sister. How you pronounce this? Mara Edie, and also Jim and Drew Holloway's mother, Ted Holloway, that married Mr. Earl. And the funny story about Mr. Earl and his Ted was that Mr. Earl was on a ship in the Pacific, and he came up to a young lady and started asking questions like Earl would do, and fell in love with her. And after the war, they got married and had children. Miss Louise is the sister of Miss Frances and Rob Moore, which Mr. Moore was known as the bean picker during the bean season. And they lived out on Moore's Crossroads. I'm going to have my sister pronounce this man's name. Okay? I found this as a cartoon. Okay? Claire, how about read the cartoon for us?
I can't read. I can't see it.
Okay. Jamie?
Okay, don't listen to Mr. Schickelgruber. That's right, lady. Pour that waste grease right down the drain. Listen, you. Waste fats make glycerin, and glycerin makes gunpowder to blast you and your gang off the earth. Ladies, don't delay. Waste fats are urgently needed for gunpowder. Save at least a tablespoon a day. When the cooking goods gone, then you have a can full. Hurry it to your meat dealer at once.
And I was talking to Dale Smith today, and I showed him this and I asked him to pronounce Adolf Hitler's father's name, which I can't pronounce. And he said, you know, there's a difference between gunpowder and black powder. I said, get out of here. He said, yeah. He said, the way you make black powder is you use urine because it has saltpeter in it. That takes, never heard that before, did you? You learned something. Okay? Mr. Herbert Rollins, he gets the mumps and has to go home. And this is in April. Of course, we know that he is the four-letter man, the only one in South Carolina, and probably the only one that ever will be. Mr. Twinkletoes, as they knew him. It seemed like the three churches, the Methodist Church, the Baptist Church, and the Presbyterian Church, were all in competition with each other, I think. Because each slide, each year that we talk about, they're doing something at all three churches. And at this time, there was 18 servicemen in the Presbyterian Church. Okay? Libby King, Dr. Libby King, which was Carolyn King, and Miss Hazel Baker King's husband, Frank Horton, and Johnny Horton, which was Eddie Epps's uncle's brothers. James Millsap, which is coach in Lake City High School. Harry Anderson, Jim McElveen. Y'all know who Jim McElveen is, don't you? Harry Courtney, Woodson Anderson, Monfrey Anderson, Bill Rollins, John O'Green, and Forrest Rogers. Forrest Rogers was Susan Rogers' father. And were there four brothers of the Anderson brothers that went to war. All of them were Presbyterians. Okay? Okay. Mr. Monk. One Saturday night, he went down to Scranton and walked on the railroad track, fixed Mr. Kirby's stove and walked on back home. Got hit by the train. One threw him 100 feet. 100 feet. This is Ella Moak's Moak. Ella Moak's daddy. Ella Moak's daddy was killed by the train. Moak. M-O-K. M-O. Yeah. Okay. I didn't know that he had other children. He had Lee, and also Mary Alice, and then Ellen.
Mary Alice was very pretty and didn't often come out.
Johnson Cotton Company. Y'all know where Johnson Cotton Company was? Right on the corner at the railroad track where the caboose is today. We got a fellow named Mr. Benny Smith. He was the vice president. He came down from North Carolina and lived in Lake City until he died. And he would be our grandfather's age. Most of these folks now are getting more and more familiar because of the fact is that they are our grandfather and father's age group. Schools open up. We got Miss Hazel Tomlinson. Everybody had Miss Hazel, I think. Miss Ross Rollins. That would be Mr. Herbert's mother. Margaret Written Bacon, we called her by a different name. I don't know if I need to say that or not. Rotten Tater, she would pop you by on your knuckles and twist your ears. Miss Louise Coward, which was Mr. Russell Floyd's bride.
Sister-in-law.
Miss Ruby Smith, she was there forever, I think. Miss Margaret Carter. Miss T.W. Stackhouse. Miss Ada Stackhouse. Now, word got out about Miss Ada that she had two sisters. Ada, Nina, and Tina Clark. Her last name was Clark. But that's not the truth. No, that is a lie. I'll have to tell you that's a lie. Then in high school, we had Miss Emily Askins, Miss Reba Green, which would be John O. Green's wife, Miss Lizzie Gravely, Mary B. Johnson, Leon Johnson's wife, and Miss Shelton Edie, which was the grandmother of Andy Edie, if y'all know Andy Edie. He's a little bit older than we are. He's the Eddie Epps' age. Yeah.
Older than dirt.
The Defense Force. Now, since Alex Bowen could not return to West Point, but had military knowledge, they made him the commander of the Lake City Home Guard. Well, Warren Horton, Eddie's uncle, and we found out that he's not really his uncle, he was his cousin's husband. Okay? He becomes the commander of the Home Guard. He doesn't know what he's getting into yet. Okay? Then we had Dalton Floyd, Edgar Whitehead, and J.D. Whitehead would be the the medical officer of the company. You know, Dr. Whitehead built the Whitehead Infirmary in 1938 and closed it in 1959. But the years 1942, 1943, he had sciatica and couldn't open the hospital. And then while he was recuperating, he went to New York to take a course in surgery. So by 1943, he reopened the hospital. And some of the nurses that he employed were Miss Nellie Smiley, Essie Turner, Miss Vivian Lynch.
Miss Dorothy Askins was Miss Dorothy Courtney.
Okay. Y'all speak up and y'all speak up loud so I can hear you, okay? And anytime you want to say something that, just go blurt it out, that'd be fine. The Methodist Church we got chimes in the Methodist Church in 1943. And on behalf of the soldiers, Mr. Louis Prost, Sam Mack's father, accepted it, and they had a program. The organist at the time was Miss Talmadge Askins, and then which was Phil Grimsley's aunt. It was Mr. Press Grimsley's sister, and Miss Hayward King was the choir director, and she was choir director forever, I think, wasn't she?
Are those the same chimes today? The same chimes?
No, we got new chimes recently in the back. When they remodeled the church in 1984, we got new chimes. Got a blimp. Blimp in 1944, excuse me. Went over Lake City and dropped a carton, and guess who caught it? Eddie Floyd. Okay? And they were asking the guys on the blimp that dropped the carton, and then they must have went every little small town in the state at the time, were asking for the young ladies or anybody that would write them, the sailors on the blimp, a little note. Joe Tommy. Tragedy hits Lake City in 1944, in January of 1944. Talking to Greg about him today, he was the oldest of the three boys, Abraham and George and Joe. Says he lost his life in an aircraft accident. What they were doing was he was on a ferry company, and they were transporting the Deliberator from California to Africa, to all ports, to England. And they left California, went to Nebraska, and then down to South America, on the way to Africa, and then back up to England. And somehow or another, an explosion happened, and the airplane went down in the jungle of Guyana, near Jonestown. And for 2 weeks they were looking for the bodies, and they found 5 of the 7 bodies. And Greg said that his great-grandmother, Joe's grandmother, did not go to church again for a long, long time, that she blamed God for what happened to my Joey. Jamie Cockfield. He was a dentist. He was my first dentist in town. He is the father of Pam and Bim Cockfield. Also, Eddie Epps' Bim is Eddie Epps' classmate. So we're talking about old people, aren't we? He was a major, and then he became a lieutenant colonel. People ask, when did Mr. Herbert join the faculty? 1944. One reason is because he had a bum knee. He had a bum knee because of being an athlete. So he joined in February 1944, and he was in charge of driver's ed and also PE. And it was that until he became AD. And okay, we got 6 stars, 5 stars, and 4 stars. Now, how would you like to have a brother or a son or a mother that had 6 sons in the military at one time, fighting a war? Even 4 stars would be worse. The 6 stars were the McKenzies. We had William M. McKenzie. William M. McKenzie Jr. is sitting on the corner right over here. His dad. His uncles, Donald, Marion, which was Pete, Carlton McKenzie. Everybody knew Carlton McKenzie. Used to be at the Roper drugstore and at Whitehead drugstore. James McKenzie, Charles McKenzie. 5-star were the McLams. Fred McLam, Jefferson Davis McLam, Marvin McLam, Robert McLam, Tommy McLam, and Charles McLam. And then we had the Postons. Harold Poston, which was Phil and Susan and Hal Poston's father. James Poston, James E. Poston, which was Jimmy and Billy Poston's father, that was at the post office. Marion Sapp Poston, and Mr. Lannis Poston that ran the filling station at the corner of Church and Main. Right. And then Mr. Vernon Poston, which was the son of Mr. Ernest. Remember the last time that we talked that the Poston, Mr. Ernest Poston's brother died. And he took in the 4 boys. This is a picture of the 6 McKenzies. The one in the middle is Bill McKenzie's father. And right here is Carlton, and that's Pete McKenzie. Two of the 6 were pharmacy mates. That's where Carlton learned his business. The Dixie home stores were being remodeled during the war in 1944. It was the colonial stores to start with, and then it became known as the Winn-Dixie. And Mr. Grover Irick was the manager of the home store. And right here, the Western Auto was at the corner where the corner drugstore was. And right next door was the home store. And life changes, physical fitness gym is located in that building. And it became Lake City's superstore. Can you see Betty Jean in this picture? A little bit about Betty Jean in that picture. Okay, graduation. The black school also had graduation, but the week before graduation, they had the whole school. On Wednesday before graduation, they had a fashion show. On Friday, they had an operetta. The 4th and 5th graders also performed. Sunny of Sunnyside. 7th grade, Gates of Happiness. And on Sunday, they had the annual sermon. And then the seniors had a play, Aunt Jersey, on the warpath. And then graduation exercises, and of course, they had final exams leading up to graduation.
8:45 is pretty late for a performance. And the white students did Sunny of Sunnyside too. I was in
Yeah,
5th grade.
it was late.
Where was that school?
105 students. Now this was in May, mid part of May 1944. Couldn't find enough folks, labor, to pick the beans. So they came up with the idea of having the students pick the beans. 105. There were 36 in the 11th grade. And then you had the 9th and the 10th grade. So almost the whole high school picked beans. Did they get out of school? No. They didn't get out of school. They had to do it in the afternoon. Okay? You had people like O'Neill Moore, Eugene Moore, Jack Moore, Richard Cook, Charlie Green, Sid Nettles, Carol Godwin, all from Lake City. They would get ready to pick beans, and they got paid for picking beans, though. Of course, the people that are in bold are the people that I know. So, y'all may know more than I do. "36 graduates, 26 girls and 10 boys. You got people like Sybil Fincher, who married Jim Poston, Annie Carolyn Laird, the bride of Mr. Harry Whitlock, James Todd Daniel, and Harry Hyman. Vernon O'Neill Moore, Lee Moore, Sid Nettles. This is in June of 1944. What happened on the 6th of June, 1944? D-Day. music has always been the forte of Lake City. It's been there forever. The Be Natural Club. Miss Shelton, Edie. Who was Patsy Hodge? Anybody know?
She married a Moore.
Rob Moore.
Her father
Rob Moore's mother was Patsy Hodge. Yeah. Okay? Barbara Godwin. Now that's, I don't know if you know Belo Whitlock. Belo, okay. You might know Bo Whitlock. That's his mother. Mona Rhodes, which is Charles Rhodes' sister. Emmett Patrick, he's around today. Joanne Whitlock, which is Mr. Harris' sister. Ruby Lee Ward, which is Karen Fowler's aunt. Clifford Gaddy, and Mary Jo Floyd, which is Miss Susie King's sister. And many more. The library was open in honor or in memory of Mr. Andrew Jackson Hicks. Mr. Jack Hicks was, when I was a little boy going to the Baptist church, Mr. Jack Hicks was a blind man, and he would cross 52 going to church.
His house is that White House on the corner.
Right. Right across the street from their CVS. Across from the liquor store, across from 52. Miss Emily Askins was the librarian, and Jamie said today that the library was in the little, tell them, Jamie.
Well, it was in the room that they call a parlor now, right off of the sanctuary.
Okay. And then they moved it across the street from the educational building was built, and then it was abandoned after they tore down the educational building.
And there was always a picture of Jack Hicks in that library, in his uniform.
Now this was mind-boggling. Now, Marineros wanted to celebrate the E-Day. Now this was in September 1944. We had the Battle of the Bulge which was in November and December and the first part of 1945 in Germany. They met, and the local pastors stated that they would announce Germany's surrender. That would come before 10 o'clock a.m. They would have service at 11. If it was after 11, they would have it at 6. At 8 o'clock, excuse me. And then it was at the 8 o'clock, they would have it the next day at 11. They had to wait a while, okay? Because the surrender was in September of 1944. 1945, excuse me. May of 1945. We had a race riot in Lake City. Had 5 or 6 people to get slashed. The fire department was called out to spray the people that was milling around on the streets. That didn't do any effect. Sheriff Birch said a white sailor and a black sailor were slashed during the mayhem and was sent to the Florence Hospital. We had a military base in Florence, which became known as the Florence Regional Airport after the war. And we had the military police stationed there. They were called. This was in September 17th. The members of the Lake City unit had bayonets fixed, had shotguns and submachine guns. This is the next day newspaper. A little bit more detail. A black pushed a white lady on the street. Now, y'all can remember when Lake City on Saturday afternoon was crowded with people, and you could bump somebody off the street accidentally.
And at that time, there were no closing hours for stores.
Right.
It wasn't until after that that stores closed at 10 o'clock on Saturday.
They could stay open at 12 o'clock. The stores could stay open at 12.
Our father had a different explanation of the start of that thing. He claims that there was a fight between the serviceman and a local in that lot behind where the barber shop was back then, which is often, it's where Lynches barber shop was most recently. And he said it spilled out from there onto Church and then around to Main.
Right. And you had people down the street getting out at the Ritz Theater at the same time. So we had a crowded bunch of people. Mob formation was a V shape. And you just pushed them and had the bayonet set, would he? And they pushed them back to Ninth Street. So we made the news. The News and Courier took it. The state paper had things about it. Charlotte Observer had things about it. All quiet. We had a resolution. When I first found this out, I was teaching school, and we used to hang out. My dad and I used to go to the M&D drugstore And Mr. R.L. Coleman was a member of the coffee shop, the coffee gang. And I asked him about the riot, and he said he didn't know anything about it. But the Home Guard, the Florence Police Department, the military police, the South Carolina constables, highway patrol, all were in Lake City at the time. He had 11 grades, remember? 1949 was, we added the 12th grade. So as the seniors, we had Ann Gravely, which was Mr. Randy Gravely's sister. Charlie Green, that Miss Libby Green's husband. Patsy Hodge in the 10th grade. Jimmy Strickland, J.B. Strickland's son, that was Strickland Jewelers. Randy Gravely was in the 9th grade. Bobby Whitehead became Dr. Bobby Whitehead, and Howard Godwin. And he married an 8th grader, Howard James Webster. Mr. Bill Rollins. Now, Mr. Bill, 50 missions over Germany. Can you imagine that? Each time he's taking his life in his own hands, practically. He got a Purple Heart, an Air Medal, an Oak Cluster. He had a bunch of bronze Oak Clusters. And he was a gunner on the Liberator. He was in the front part of the airplane. Can you imagine sitting there with two guns, two 50mm guns, and you seeing the action firsthand? Mr. Harry Whitlock flew in the Flying Fortress, which is 17, the B-17. This is the B-24. He was on the ball turned, and he could go around and around, and he would sit like this. He said it was kind of comfortable, but he was a little fella at the time. And he flew 50 missions too. So, they did do a great service for us. We still carried on. We had a football team. We had Milton Matthews, right there. Mr. Gene Moe, Richie Cook, his name was Lord. Then you had Cal Godwin. On the second row, I can't see it. Wesley Floyd. Randy Gravely. And this little fella became a big fella, Jimmy Lynch. And football coach was Mr. Herbert Rollins. George Anderson will become the mayor of Lake City in 1945. That's Arthur Anderson's grandfather. The election was later null and void, and a new election was warned. And we'll find that out later on. These are the pictures that I collected of the servicemen that fought in World War II. Mr. Harry Whitlock, right here. Jimmy Carter, Mr. R.L. Cockfield's buddy. I'll tell you about that next time. Pat McElveen, he died in 1949. Mr. Jim McElveen, Mr. Percy Whitlock, James Percy, went up to Clemson, and Mr. Harold Stokes, right here. Got any questions? Thank y'all for so much for coming tonight. Appreciate it a bunch. Y'all mean a whole lot.